Then COVID came. So with all that kind of layered on, what in your opinion, how did that accentuate or amplify this effect?
So basically, I mentioned the first part of the interview that I didn't really do much for a year and a half while the COVID was raging, through most of 2020 and then a bit of 2021. But I was looking a lot at Twitter, and I was reading a lot about the pandemic and reading a lot of news and reading a lot of blogs and reading just a lot of everything having to do with it. And it's very clear to me that, and again, the pandemic is real. Almost 1 million Americans have died from it. It is a extremely bad virus. It is nothing you really want in your body. It is, and all of the people who are saying that it is just like a pandemic or whatever, that's obviously horrible. But there's a lot that's being hidden from us, especially about the masks. People in this country seem to think, people who have a certain political position in this country seem to think that masks are magical. We're not being told the actual, the actual efficacy rates of these masks. We are not being told, it's coming, it's this narrative that's coming from the top and it's being called science. But in fact, it feels very much like there's a lot of disinformation out there, and it's coming a lot from the people who you would call disinformation people, like the actual anti-vaxxers, whatever. But it's coming from Pfizer too. It's coming from the governments too. We have not been giving it, the fact that you can look at, so Sweden, the country of Sweden really didn't lock down. They really didn't do masking. They did do a little bit of it because Scandinavia in general tends to be a bit socially distanced, not to chopping in stereotypes, but they're kind of known for being a bit socially distant at the best of times.
Yeah, Northern Europeans. It's actually related. It's related to the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the closer your what's the personal space narrows, right? So as you said, Swedes are whoa.
And you look at that, and it's like Sweden really, when you look at Sweden's overall COVID progression, it really they did exactly what the prime minister said, is that we are kind of getting everything out of the way early. We are getting everything, all of this horror, because we don't believe there's going to be. It's just, I don't want to go too far into things, but it kind of feels like, and people were just ignoring the fact that when you get right down to it, their numbers were not any worse than the United States or the UK or other places that locked down.
Or just compare Florida to California.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't looked at the numbers in the last 24 hours or so. You may have to adjust for the demographics in Florida, right? Because they have a huge elderly population.
Mm-hmm.
But so they were much more open than California was, and I lived in California, and I'm still shocked by some of the mandates and things.
Oh, and here in Oregon too, yeah.
And a lot of businesses collapse. Right now, it's small businesses are either dead or dying. On the other hand, though, Florida did do one thing, I think, very early on, that they allowed people to get vaccines much faster. So the elderly population was able to choose to get it. So that's important to say. It's not that they were anti-vax, despite what the narrative want to tell you. They're just they took more of a personal accountability, and it's your choice. Now, I know in this sort of environment, the first response to that is, well, your choice is going to impact other people's choices, and so it's not. I don't want to downplay or trivialize it, but to your point, people just kind of locked in at the very beginning on absolute shutdown, nobody leaves, this and that, wash my mail and things like that. And the other thing that really disappointed me is at the very beginning of the pandemic, there weren't enough PPE to go around. So when Fauci was asked about what to do, he's just like, oh, well, if you want, you don't need to mask, et cetera. And he knew that, while mask is not going to stop it, it's going to help, right? It's just another layer of protection. But he knew that those masks would help. And he deliberately, well, I shouldn't say deliberately decided, but he did something that probably could have saved a lot of people probably lost their lives because they thought it was fine. And not only that, by making that sort of statement early on in the pandemic, he completely shot credibility of governmental bodies. So the entire thing, like, what can you believe? So, but
there was like a week early in the pandemic. Do you remember that week where it was considered like a conservative signifier to wear a mask, and then it all of a sudden switched?
Oh, or shutting down China was racist, right? And it's just like, and the other thing is like, who threw money at Project Warp Speed, right? Like there were people saying like, don't take the Trump vaccine. And then all of a sudden it like flipped. It was just like, if you don't take the vaccine, like you don't deserve medical care. What? Like what?
Yeah, like where did that come from? Because I know people who are now very, very pro-vax who are like, yeah, I'm not taking the Trump vaccine, or I don't trust this. And then as soon as Biden was elected, and it's like, it's the same shot. It was developed under Trump, and now it's available under Biden. Like it's the same exact shot though. How are you so easily like led around by the nose?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not saying this to like say Trump did something great, right? Like I'm just saying that there are many other things he did that were completely counterproductive, right? What not wearing a mask himself, not in order to kind of make it a political thing. That was certainly not helpful in controlling the spread. The other thing that drove me nuts is when you're looking for a reason or rationale for an outbreak, right? Typically, you want to take the approach of Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation behind something is typically, what was true. And I remember the beginning of the pandemic, if you even suggested that, hey, there's only one level 4 biocontainment facility in a billion-dollar or billion person plus country, and it's in Wuhan. And it's the Wuhan Coronavirus Research Institution, and they work on SARS vaccines. But no, it came from somebody at a wet market that ate a bat, that ate feces, or ate something, or the other way around, a bat that like bit a penguin, and then they ate a penguin, and it's just like. And that became like, if you even suggested like, hey, maybe it just, I'm not saying that the Chinese weaponized it and unleashed it in the world. I think that's crazy, but maybe it just escaped from the lab. Like, seems pretty logical to me. And it was suddenly like, oh, racist, like you.
We all kind of accept that that's the case. At least I think most people do now. The lab leak.
I don't know. It's okay to say it now. It's okay to say it. Like back in the beginning, you couldn't even raise it as a possibility. And I was just
remember that.
It was, just absolutely insane. And then there's another story too. If you notice, the administration never really pushed that narrative, which in most cases it would be in its interest to do so, right? To pin it on China and things like that. And I think there's another part of that narrative, which is, and again, I don't remember where I read this or saw it. So please, like audience, take it with a huge grain of salt, investigate it yourself. Because, I don't think it was in the New York Times, right? But there was, I read somewhere that, there's an organization that wanted to work on gain of function research, right? And gain of function research is just adding capability to a virus. It could just be some physical change or that has no real world capability. But there was an organization that I guess worked with American organization that worked with Chinese labs, and you can't do gain of function research in the United States, but somehow arranged it so that you could work with Chinese labs to kind of do gain of function research. So they apparently they had sent a letter to DARPA, right? And they said, hey, we can do some of this research to help as biodefense, et cetera. And DARPA responded something to the effect of, that's gain of function research. It's illegal. Sorry, we decline. So they took this same research to the NIH, and NIH was like, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. So I don't know if that's what really happened, but given the way that the government has responded, could you imagine if the American government, it's it's not just the Chinese. The Chinese were kind of working on behalf of, and then not just themselves, but the other piece that was highly suspicious is before the WHO investigated, the Chinese just wiped everything. Like,
Yeah.
right? It's just like, come on.
And nobody really seemed to think that was a huge deal. Like,
nothing to see here.
So little curiosity about like where this thing came from. Like, it feels like now, like, it's at least you can say it came from a lab, but like people just seem profoundly curious about why this happened at all, and it's weird.
And look, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying, like, because the intelligence agencies will never be able to know with 100% clarity unless they get a hold of somebody who was actually in the lab what actually happened. But that narrative certainly makes a lot more sense than like this 3 species jump but the fact that you can't even utter that out loud without somebody attacking you back then was absolutely and utterly crazy. Which brings us kind of to deplatforming, and one person who very much was curious about that narrative was Joe Rogan, who our colleague Nick Mamatas calls the Oprah for men, or Oprah for men, and I think that's pretty accurate. Like, he just has extremely long form discussions of people who come on and present their worldviews. I mean, he's had Oliver Stone on, right? If you ever watched anything with Oliver Stone, right, he's a complete kook, right? He's nuts, but at least he has an opportunity to demonstrate that he's a kook, as opposed to just letting somebody just label you, and then you have no in a 2-minute soundbite that they edit, so it makes you look like the biggest doofus in the world when you could actually we would take Mitt Romney back in against Obama, right? And he was talking about Russia being a threat, and Obama said, like, in the 80s called, and they went,
oh yeah, I remember that.
Right. And at the time, I agree with Obama. I looked at Russia, and they had declining demographics and declining population, and I kind of agree. I was like, why is Mitt Romney focused on this? Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about right now. At the time, he probably didn't, but over time, with this asymmetric warfare and things like that, we've kind of given them a bit of an edge in kind of shaping population. Because again, social media is a technology that allows our adversaries to reach out and touch every individual American now, and can really excite passions and things like that, which is, I think, also part of the equation. But in terms of deplatforming, like, one thing that I noticed is, and these two issues are, there's a lot of nuanced differences between them, but at the same time, there was a deplatforming attempt by Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, which I'm totally fine with people saying, like, I don't agree with this. I'm just pulling my music, right? That's their right. But the fundamental difference here was, I will pull my music if you don't silence.
Yeah, it was an ultimatum. It wasn't just I'm pulling my music. It's the ultimatum. And now Yo Young is going on saying, Spotify workers need to quit. I don't know if you've seen that. He's now going to, like, and I actually have a different take on this. I think that he is probably either, unconsciously or more likely consciously working for another corporation. He's been really, really pushing Amazon Music, and like Amazon's like giving like a couple months free to people who, sign up or something like that because of Neil. And then, like, it really right. just feels kind of like old-timey corporate sabotage to me.
Well, it's follow the money, right? So if you're an artist and this is a legitimate issue on Spotify. If you're a recording artist, it's very hard to make any money whatsoever on Spotify. So there is a good reason if you're an artist to pull your material, because you're not making any money on it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that makes sense.
what's happening is, there's other stuff that's going on in the background, but then they're also kind of trying to enter the culture war. And for what? Like, why would you? My view has always been, let there be a market of ideas, and the bad ideas will be exposed for what they truly are. But when you
Mhm.
take down that market, you increase the allure of the worst and most vile ideas, because there's no one to counter them. And you also provide people with this kind of transgressive allure of, like, we're the people who really know what's going on. We're the you know we're the rebels. We're this and that. When you make something, so sanctioned, you increase the probability that bad ideas will be taken up. Not only that, what social media allowed, like, government agencies to do is actually track people who could be threats. But when you deplatform those people, you drive them underground and make them much harder to track. And it's
Mhm.
just like, so even when it's in kind of the, and I'm not even going to characterize it as left or right. I'm just going to characterize it as kind of the, I'll make them extreme. So, like, free speech absolutists versus the, um, the censors is, people will quip over, or will try to make fine arguments that only governments can censor, and this, no official censor, right? It could be a company, it could be, but there's also kind of the speech is violence types, right?
Mhm.
You're referring to, and I think what they don't necessarily understand is, by sanctioning some of these views that they disagree with, they're only they're only making it harder for the worst types of ideas to spread and track. And,
Mhm.
like I said, like, particularly on the, the kinds of discussions I have in private with conservative friends are far more, like, scary than what you see now, because they've essentially vanished from view. So I don't know. It's a scary time, and it's and the other thing too is you're attacking people's ability to earn a living. And what do you do when you take somebody's livelihood away from them? Like, how many options do you give them?
And that's what drives me crazy about this whole thing is like we have documented cases of like people like small business owners losing their whole businesses, people losing careers, everything. And at the time, people will say like, people on the left, I mean, that's who I see more of because that's more, my own filter bubble. But you see them, saying like, oh well, this is a big deal, but cancel culture still doesn't exist, kind of thing. And it's like, no, it very clearly does. I mean, you yourself just pointed out some examples of it. But yeah, I mean, the fact that people are like trying, and the thing is, if you lose your job, that's not going to make you suddenly like want to vote every. That's going to make you full of like resentment and
Mm-hmm.
anger. And I'm really worried we're going to see if political violence gets worse in this country, we're going to see some bombings, some shootings, some things in retaliation. That's retaliation. It goes back to like, President like Garfield was shot over not wanting, having a job or something. Like that's,
Yeah, I'm actually
going to be
surprised
like,
we haven't seen more, like, you ever see the movie Falling Down?
mhm.
Yeah, so it's not Kirk Douglas. What's his son's name?
Michael Douglas.
Michael Douglas. It's a movie early '90s, and it coincided with the closure or the downsizing of the U.S. military and the ensuing after effects of the, defense budget cuts and things like that in the aerospace industry. And this guy's like an aerospace guy, loses his job, and and he goes on a pretty, it's actually pretty, like if you watch that movie now, it's pretty racist. Like the guy behaves like a pretty very pretty racist, the way he handles it, but he goes on, he just goes nuts. And I'm actually surprised I haven't seen more of that yet. And we're just kind of moving toward a place where we shouldn't be going, right? You can't.
And then there's also the thing like, well, there we could reach a thing where we have in two entirely separate economies entirely. Conservatives all work for these companies, and of course then you get in the problem like, what about us that don't quite fit in either paradigm? And like that seems like a really awfully balanced state of affairs if you're going to have like two of every institution or two of every kind of business.
Yeah, like growing up, you were probably just like me. You're always taught when in kind of a work environment, there's two things you never discuss: religion or politics. And
Mm-hmm.
there are companies now that if you don't wear your politics on your sleeve, you are a suspect.